Hi, I'm John Stevenson, and we're going to be looking at Psalm 54, Seeking Help in a Difficult Place. I ought to say that Psalm 54, actually from Psalm 51 all the way to Psalm 60, are what we call situational psalms. These superscriptions tell of situations in which David found himself. Going back to Psalm 51, the superscription talked about how this is when David sinned with Bathsheba and Nathan came into him. And rebuked him. In Psalm 52, we have when Doeg had killed 85 priests, and David is singing about that. 53, there's no superscription. Psalm 54, where we are now, this is when David was hiding from Saul, and some things occurred. Somebody turned him in. Psalm 55, there's going to be no superscription. Psalm 56, David's hiding in Gath. Psalm 57, he's hiding from Saul in the cave. A lot of hiding themes here. 58, there's no superscriptions. Psalm 59, Saul tries to kill David in the house. And finally, Psalm 60 is later on when David is in times of war with Aram and with Edom. Notice these are not necessarily, in fact, they're not, let me just say, in chronological order. But these are the situations, at least according to the superscriptions, when these psalms are either taking place or sort of reminiscing and connecting those stories with those psalms. We begin there with the superscription for the choir director on stringed instruments. And remember that we ought to think sometimes about maybe pulling out our guitar or piano or something with strings on it and singing through these psalms. They are meant to be accompanied to music. And then we see it is a maskil of David. We've talked about that term before. It has the idea of meditation or reflection. Someone translated a skillful poem. I suppose that works. Sometimes wisdom. And I think that might be the case here, although that's not the first thing that jumps to mind. But we're going to focus upon that idea at the end and maybe get some wisdom from the psalm. A maskil of David. And then the situation when the Ziphites came and said to Saul, "Is not David hiding himself among us?" Now, we actually have a couple of different instances, two different times where these Ziphites, people living in the mountain territory of central Judah, had informed Saul of David's movements. This is 2 Samuel chapter 23, verse 19, and again in 26, verse 1. And so one of those times, or maybe you can think of it in both those times, where they had, can I say it, they had been tattletales. They had blabbed on David, and knowing that Saul was after David, they took the side of Saul instead of David. So this is about taking sides, and this is about people that are not friendly to you, maybe even betrayers. And now the psalm begins. Save me, O God, by your name, and vindicate me by your power. This is typical Psalms synonymous parallelism. We have some other sorts of parallelism that can be used on occasion, especially when we get to the Proverbs, we'll see more of those. But this synonymous parallelism is what we see mostly in the Psalms, at least in this point, where you say it and then you say the same thing with different words. So save me and vindicate me, or you're saying the same thing. By your name, by your power, is saying the same thing, but with different words. We continue, hear my prayer, O God. Give ear to the words of my mouth. Again, you're saying the same thing. Hear my prayer, give ear. This is a call for God to listen up. Here's my request. And now, verse 3 is the problem. For strangers have risen against me, and violent men have sought my life. Again, you're saying that the strangers are the violent men. It's not two different groups. They have not set God before them. And so we see this is the disloyal opposition. Remember that loyalty term, we use that term chesed to describe loyalty. Sometimes God's loyalty for us, sometimes our loyalty for God. In this case, there's a disloyalty. Now, we don't use the term there. The chesed is not used, but the idea is there. They have been disloyal to David. Even though he's from Judah and they're from Judah, they're being disloyal to him. Verse 4, behold, God is my helper. And that term helper is the same, that term azer is the same term that's used way back in Genesis chapter 2, where God makes a helper for Adam. And in that case, that's the woman. Here, God is the helper. The Lord is the sustainer of my soul. Again, the parallelism, the helper, the sustainer, speaking of the same thing. Verse 5, he will recompense the evil to my foes. And then he calls, destroy them in your faithfulness. But notice that term, he will recompense, yashuv hara, that term shuv, we usually translate that turn, or once in a while, I guess, depending on the context, we can even render it repent. But turn, notice he's going to turn the evil. And that term evil can refer to the moral evil, or it can refer to the just bad things taking place, depending on the context. Um, Even though I think the foes might have been morally evil, I think he's not turning moral evil and making David evil, but rather the bad things that they're doing. Notice he will recompense the evil to my foes. He's going to turn it around on them. It's not like God is going to bring bad things on them. He's going to take their bad things and turn it around on them. It's like the parable of the person who digs a pit and then he falls into it. If he hadn't dug the pit, he wouldn't be falling. There wouldn't be anything in which to fall. And the same thing happens here. He'll recompense the evil to my foes, destroy them in your faithfulness. That's the supplication. That's the request. He's saying, so do that to my enemy, to my foes. Oh, the term there, uh, shara, the plural of shorer. The term there can, yes, it's my foe, my enemy, but it carries with it the idea of the watcher, but not just somebody who's watching casually, somebody who's watching to get you, somebody who's watching in ambush. And I mention that because there's going to be a watching slash seeing theme in the last verse or two of this psalm. And we're almost done. It's a very short psalm. So he has to destroy them in your faithfulness. Now, when he asks to destroy them, this is what we call a imprecatory prayer, an imprecation that David is saying, "Get them, Lord, take them out." And however you want to do that, you're God, you do that, but take them out. Uh, Sometimes we're going to see very graphic imprecatory prayers in the Psalms. This one's not so graphic. It's just very brief, one-liner. Destroy them in your faithfulness. Verse 6, willingly I will sacrifice to you. This is, Lord, you take him out, and then I'm going to sacrifice to you, and I will give thanks to your name, O Lord, for it is good. So he makes that one line imprecation, that one line, take them out, Lord, and then moves right on to, and I'm going to thank you as you do that. I'll sacrifice you, I'll thank you, give thanks to your name, O Lord, for it is good. Verse 7, and this is the last verse of the entire psalm, very short psalm. For he has delivered me from all trouble, and my eye has looked with satisfaction upon my enemies. Now that's the part I really want. I'm going to pause and talk about a bit, because I said there was a seeing theme, and as my eye has looked, notice the words with satisfaction are italicized, so actually they're not there. I think the idea is there. In fact, every translation I checked out had some way to explain that looking, but literally it's just my eye looked, or my eye saw upon my enemies, and that's very literal there. The ra'ata aini, that term ra'a is that's to see. I know it sounds a little bit like the term for evil, but it's not. Two different terms, spelled differently. But my eye has looked upon my enemies. And I want to suggest that there is a looking theme in the scriptures, and especially in the Old Testament, that is referenced by Jesus in the New Testament when he's speaking to people and he says, your father Abraham, of course he's speaking to Jewish people, your father Abraham rejoiced to see my day, and he saw it and was glad. And then, of course, if you remember the context, they look at him and they say, you're not that old. And Abraham's like a couple of thousand years ago. How did Abraham see your day? They take it very literally. But if they had thought about it, I think they might have, excuse the pun, I think they might have seen something that was there to be seen. You see? In the story of Abraham, there is a seeing theme that comes through loud and clear. It's that time where God comes to Abraham and says to Abraham, I want you to take your son that was promised, that son for whom you waited so many years. I want you to take that son to a place I will designate, and I want you to sacrifice him to me. Now, human sacrifice back in Abraham's day was a real thing that actually took place in other cultures. God had never commanded that. And even here, when God commands it, he's going to stop Abraham from doing it. But it was not something that was unknown, and Abraham responds in obedience, and he takes Isaac, and they set out on a journey to this place. And we pick up in Genesis chapter 22, verse 4, on the third day, Abraham raised his eyes and saw, and the term saw is our old friend Ra'ah. He saw the place from a distance, and so they get there, and he's got some servants with him, and he tells the servants, "You stay here. We're going to go up, and we'll sacrifice, and we'll come back down." So it's interesting. He says, "And we will come back down." I think Abraham was assuming God was going to do something there. I'm not sure what. Um, and so they set off, and as they're going up, they're going to build an altar, and they do. They get up there and they build an altar. And Isaac says, "Dad, we forgot something. We forgot the sacrifice." And Abraham says to his son, "God will provide," but the word "provide" isn't actually there. The word instead is, "God will see for himself the sacrifice for the burnt offering, my son." You say, "Wait a minute, what does that mean?" Well, it's like when you say, I'm going to provide lunch, I'm going to see to lunch. So the word provide works, but it's the same word, ra'ah. And I want you to, excuse the pun, I want you to see that. And God will see for himself the lamb for the burnt offering, my son. He's going to see to that. And so they get up there and they build the altar, and Abraham takes Isaac and binds him and lays him on the altar, and is ready, takes a knife, he's ready to plunge it into his own son. And suddenly an angel of the Lord is there, and the angel says, "Abraham, Abraham, hold up." And Abraham pulls up with the knife. He's there ready. And he looks up, and we read that Abraham raised his eyes and looked, again, that's Ra'ah, and behold, behind him a ram. And God is saying, "Take the ram. I can see you are going to be obedient, but I am providing this ram as a substitute." And Abraham takes the ram and releases Isaac and takes the ram and kills the ram instead, and the ram dies instead of Isaac. And then Abraham names the place, he called the name of that place, "The Lord will provide," but it's, again, the word there, the Hebrew word is not provide, it's ra'ah. The Lord will see. And to this day, it's called, and this expression, "God will see to it." It will be seen on the mountain of the Lord. Now, I say that because we have this passage that we're looking at. Go back. My eye has looked with satisfaction. Remember the satisfaction, that's the translators trying to help us. My eye has looked upon my enemies. And when we pull in the use of that term and are reminded of Abraham's looking, it reminds us of how the ram was taken that Abraham saw. He looked and saw, and God had seen to that. And that reminds us of the story of Jesus, where Jesus was the one that God looked at. He took the place of the enemy that had been seen in order to reconcile us to God. He was our substitute. He died in place of us in the same way that ram died in place of Isaac, and in the same way that the enemies here are describing as dying in place of the writer. Do you see the connection? Jesus became the enemy in our place. We were at enmity with God. He took our place, the place of enmity, the place of hatred, and suffered as if he was hating God and as if he was hated by God, so that we could be reconciled to him. Do you see it? Do you see it? Has your eye seen